Oh, well, thank you very much, Tim. It's great to have you on board as president. And Ruan, thank you as outgoing president for having been such a star over the last 2 years. How fabulous to be at an ACTS conference that is standing room only and would have been bigger were it not for fire regulations. I think there's a theme here. You know, I've been thinking a lot after our nation's tragedy in Christchurch about how proud I am to be a Kiwi because of the way that our country came together. Not so proud of some of the things Parliament did, but Parliament's always been the weakest link in our national story. What I'm proud of is that we have this cohesive set of values as a country, and it got me thinking about where those come from, because none of the usual explanations actually work. You know, some countries are ethnocentric. You take your Finlands, your Japans. You know, we are one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. We have schools here in Auckland where the students speak 60 different languages. 40% of Aucklanders not only weren't born in Auckland, weren't born in New Zealand. And I think that's a great thing to celebrate. But it can't be the uniting glue of our country that everybody's from the same place. You know, some countries are brought together by theocracy. You look at your Saudi Arabias or your Irans. I don't think that's a good model, by the way. But it's certainly not the case here in New Zealand. We are a nation founded, at least in part, on religious tolerance. And I think that's a wonderful thing. We can hardly claim to have an ancient and long history, like your Greeks or your Chinese, perhaps going back 5 millennia. In fact, we're one of, if not the youngest country in the world. And we don't have an overbearing government that defines the state as it has in places like North Korea, Venezuela, also not a good model. We are, by and large, by international current standards at least, a relatively free society. So what is it that binds our country together? What is our national DNA that allowed us to respond with such unanimity in condemnation of our nation's tragedy after Christchurch? What is that coherency? Where does it come from? Where does that unity in New Zealand originate? If it's none of the traditional explanations that work for most other countries. I think it's a question worth answering. It's important for New Zealand, it's important for ACT. And I came across the answer when I was looking at a map of the world, one of the ones that hadn't left us off. You see, if you look at it, one thing we have in common is that we are children of pioneers. Each of us or our ancestor has gone further and freely chosen to give up what they had and risk everything for a better tomorrow. Incidentally, the runners-up in this contest are the Australians, but they didn't go quite as far, and some of them not quite as freely. You see that the fact is we're a nation of people that freely chose to be here. That is our DNA, and it's as clear as day if you only look at the map. I think of my own ancestry, which started out probably about 600 or 700 years ago, with some of the most fearless and ingenious navigators in human history. For Pacific people to navigate the Pacific Ocean was no different, if you adjust for the amount of technology at the time, from people sending spaceships to the moon and beyond 600 or 700 years later. It's an incredible heritage. And I was talking a couple of years ago to a long-standing ex-supporter about how she had come here. And I asked, do you think that you would choose to come to New Zealand had it been your choice? She told me the most extraordinary story of her great, I think, grandmother, who had tried to come here by ship, been shipwrecked in the Indian Ocean, marooned on an island. She had several children. She lost some of them tragically, had one son survive eating mutton birds on this island in the middle of what I think is the second biggest ocean in the world. They were rescued by some probably dodgy looking characters and taken back to London where they'd started. Now what did they do next? Well, as you know, my long-standing ACT member is a New Zealander, so you can probably guess they got on the next boat and came to New Zealand. And if that's not the Kiwi spirit, I don't know what is. And our long-standing member said, yes, based on that story, I think I was always supposed to be a New Zealander, and to be a New Zealander is to be a pioneer, to be an entrepreneur, someone whose history contains freely choosing to go further, giving up more for a better tomorrow than any other humans ever have. And it's interesting to ask what they were trying to get away from, because the next pattern that you notice is that just about every single person who's come here in the entire history of our country can say they were going to a place that had more government, coming from a place, that had more government, more bureaucracy, more tax, more stifling of their freedom of expression than here. And arguably, the Maori had the best opportunity of all, because when they got here, there was no government at all. But even for people coming today, you look at people coming from China, where it's dangerous to freely express yourself. You look at people coming from India, where the bureaucracy absolutely stifles. You look at people coming from Europe, places like France, where the government taxes you at up to 75% and keeps more than half of all income in total as tax. We have a tradition of people coming here not only for opportunity, but for freedom. And opportunity through freedom is what the ACT Party offers. Now, I think it's becoming more urgent, because if you look around the world's on fire. Just about every weekend in London, they have riots and protests. The French, other than the quality of wine and cheese, are a complete basket case politically. You watch the news, they, any minute, could go back to chopping people's heads off. And then you look at the States, a lot of people upset about the election of President Trump. I'm not entirely upset, but there's mixed views there. And then my favourite of all is the Ukrainians. Now, I've got some good friends from the Ukraine that I've been helping with a few immigration matters out in East Auckland. And they tell me that they got so sick of their politicians that they took a comedian who played a fictional president in a political drama and elected him as their real president. I mean, it's just... I know I don't know a huge amount about the Ukraine, but it just makes me think, what a great country. I mean, really, what a fantastic place. But there is a serious point to this, that all around the world, people have become disillusioned with their politicians. And I think it's not because of any of the incidental issues that people bring up. I think it's because politicians through the welfare state over 30 or 40 years, make it 50, 60, have actually made promises they just can't keep. The basic promise of politicians is that if you give us a third to half your income and let us regulate all the property we haven't taken, then we will create a society where you have equal opportunity, where you will be safe, and where you can live a comfortable life so long as you basically do the right things. And for more and more people around the world, that's not true, and they're not happy. What's interesting is that if you look at the countries ranked as the freest economies by my old think tank friends and the Fraser Institute and Heritage Foundation, well, the freest economies are Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, Chile, UAE got in there somehow, Canada, the UK, Taiwan. The US is not in the top 10 anymore. Obama took them out in terms of economic freedom. But what's interesting is that those countries, other than the ones such as Taiwan and the UK that have problems from outside, are some of the most stable. It's actually countries that practice free markets that have greater political stability. And I think it's important, if you look around the world that's almost on fire, that New Zealand has an advocate for free markets and an advocate for free minds that is consistent with the reason that ourselves as new immigrants and those of us who have been here a bit longer, our ancestors, chose to come here for. And I'm enormously proud to have had Richard Prebble open this conference. I'm enormously proud to be part of a party founded by Sir Roger Douglas, because our party has a long heritage of breaking down privilege, of introducing free markets, and generating opportunity, which is most important for the people that have the least. And I'm proud of what we've been able to do as an ex-party in recent years. Just take charter schools. The fact that we were prepared with a single MP out of 120 to introduce a new model, not based on more money, but based on freedom of communities to create schools that engage their students, well, that is something that has changed kids' lives for the better. I always tell the story I used in my maiden statement of Parliament about Hope. Hope was literally, or that was literally her name. Hope came up to me, she was about 15, she said, "I never knew I was smart until I came here." You think about that, kids are very sincere and sometimes naive. They believe that their surroundings are normal no matter what. She believed that she was a dumb kid. She got into a different environment, a charter school that engaged her, and all of a sudden she decided that she was smart. We did that for kids 2,000 times. I think that's something that we can be incredibly proud of. But then you look at more recent times in opposition. You know, I think one of the most important rights that a person has is that if you are ill and you are suffering at the end of your life, then it's your life and it's your choice. And you should be able to choose how you go and when you go, not suffer for somebody else's morality. That's a very apt thing. And when nobody else would put end-of-life choice or assisted dying on the political agenda, where nobody else wanted to talk about it in Parliament, the ACT Party, again with only one MP, put it on the agenda and made them talk about it. That again is the difference that the ACT Party makes. And it, thank you. And it goes on. You know, in our country we are a democracy. Relatively uncontroversial statement. But what that really means is that the government governs with the consent of the people. And the people elect a parliament so that the laws are made with the permission of the people, and the people have a chance to be consulted and have input and scrutinise the laws. Fairly uncontroversial. Well, you watch and see how many firearms this government can reclaim for $168 million. It will be a disaster. We will be less safe after this rushed and flawed legislation than we were on March 15. Only one party was prepared to stand up to the madness and say, actually, the correct way to defy a terrorist who attacked our free society is not to capitulate, turn Parliament into a rubber stamp and start to resemble the kinds of dictatorships that we're all supposed to be against. It's to actually soberly make good law and work through our problems as a democracy. The ACT Party was the only party to stand up for that. Now, I don't know... Thank you. I don't know if we should be happy about that or not. I'm a bit worried we've got 119 other MPs who don't think that parliamentary process and democracy is important, but that's why we need Beth Holbrook and many others to become members of Parliament so that ACT's voice is larger. And so it goes on. The number of times Parliament votes 119 to 1 is quite extraordinary. and I won't list them all. Sometimes I think maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's them. And I'm pretty sure because I'm aligning with the values of New Zealand. And one of those values that I never thought I'd seriously have to stand up for was freedom of speech. Why? Because normally the liberal left, or at least some of them, can be relied upon to stand up for your basic bodily autonomy and the right to think what you like and say what you like. They may want to take all your money and your property. We know that. But they've usually been reliable at protecting your own liberties. And it's a great shame that we now have a government that wants to relitigate the basic idea that you can say whatever you like so long as you are not inciting or threatening violence. No questions asked. And the reason for this actually goes back to the rule of law. Under the rule of law, you cannot be punished by the state on the basis of opinion, only on the basis of fact. You take burglary. It's very simple. Did you enter the premise? Did you commit a crime while you were there? Now, people can dispute what the facts are, but they are facts. You cannot be punished unless the facts are proven in court. Under hate speech laws, the only test is would a reasonable person be offended by something you said? Well, what sort of fact is that? Who gets to decide? It is an invitation for political prejudice and mob rule and suppression of one of the most important things we have, which is the right to think as we think and say what we think, so long as we're not harming others. And I'm very proud to be in an ACT party that stands up for that, even if my parliamentary colleagues won't. And I've got to say, and I've got to say that we are facing what I call the intolerant new left. And the intolerant new left have three characteristics. One is they are nasty. You know, if we really did have hate speech laws, I could get half the people who tweet at me put in jail. When some days I think maybe it's not a bad idea. You know? The nastiness is incredible. The second thing is that they are hypocritical. So somebody who says that we all need to be kinder and nicer and that Christchurch has asked us to change, then goes on Twitter and says that someone else is, for example, a human stain. And I think that kind of hypocrisy and the weaponisation of the kindness agenda is an enormous danger that we face. But the third part, apart from being nasty and hypocritical, is that the intolerant new left want to use the state to punish their opponents. They want to turn speech into a popularity contest where the winners get to sanction and perhaps even detain and imprison the losers of that popularity contest. And that is something that we must oppose at all cost. And so the first policy that we released today with ACT is the idea that we should strip our laws of anything that suggests you can be punished simply on the basis of opinion. We must hold on to the simple principle that you should only be punished by the state on the basis of fact. And then we had some other policies, and weren't they fantastic? You know, Nick Kearney's explanation of the student education account has the potential to be the start of the biggest education revolution in the Western world. It is so devastatingly simple that we take the $15 billion a year spent on education by the taxpayer, we divide it by the fact that there are, give or take, 60,000 kids born in this country every year, and we say that the majority of that $250,000 won't be sent through absolutely Byzantine an incomprehensible education bureaucracy. I say that as someone who was in charge of it for a time. But actually will be put in a student education account that the parents can use to fund their child's education at a school of their choice, public or private. And you think about the implications of that. You no longer have to take your taxpayer education funding to a school that must use union contracts. You can take your share of funding to a whole range of new schools that I have no doubt would spring up in a market designed to serve parents with a diversity of tastes and aspirations for their children. But there's a few other aspects to it. One is that it starts at 2 years old. We're treating early childhood education exactly the same as primary education. And the reason for that is that for far too long, the way we've funded education has been an upside-down pyramid. Tiny amount of money at the start, bit more for primary, bit more for secondary, hose it at you for 3 years getting a MIC degree and off you go. We need to turn the pyramid the other way round and actually invest where it makes the most difference. Meanwhile, at the other end of the scale, work is changing. Many more people will become lifelong learners. And having a student education account where you have real money and real choices about what you do with it, rather than choosing from a bunch of highly subsidised institutions, is the beginning of lifelong learning. So this student education account policy has got me really excited, and it's exactly the sort of policy that people who came 18,000 kilometres in an open vessel for a better life would have wanted. And then we talked a little bit about a regulatory constitution. You know, the great irony is that the reason we have to follow so many rules and regulations in New Zealand is because the government never follows any of the rules that it has for making regulations in the first place. When this new government was elected, it said it didn't have to follow regulatory impact analysis requirements in its first 100 days. Why? Well, they never explained that. I would have thought the most important time for a government to follow regulatory impact analysis is when it was brand new and had no idea what it was doing. But in any case, they scotched that. Now, the idea that a citizen can go to court and ask for a declaration that a badly made law is invalid is one of the most powerful transfers of real authority from the state to the individual New Zealander ever proposed in this nation's history. And you wait for the opposition, they will hate it, but it would make us a much freer, more aspirational, achieving society. And then finally we heard about a flat tax. And I thought that Belinda's explanation, and by the way, if you're watching this online, then you really should watch some of the earlier videos in this series because some of the policies and the explanations of them are outstanding. But I thought Belinda's explanation was devastating. GST, one rate. Company tax, one rate. Excise tax, one rate. Why can't we have one rate and benefit on income tax and benefit from the simplicity of that? But the other thing is not just administrative, but it's about the message. The message we currently send to New Zealanders is that if you work hard and succeed, then you deserve to be punished. We won't just tax you on all your income, we'll actually target you with progressively higher income taxes. We want to send the opposite message, that this is an achieving society where you pay your dues, but you're not here to be socially engineered by politicians trying to tax this person, give money to this person in the hope of getting elected. The flat tax is one of the most powerful signals we could send about the values of our society, of any policy there is, not to mention that it would make New Zealand a magnet for work, saving and investment, raise productivity and solve one of our biggest problems, which is gradually falling behind the rest of the world in terms of values. If you like those policies, then I put it to you that you might be an ACT supporter. If you're here at this conference, it's probably highly likely because the fees are quite high, it's taking a day out of your Sunday. But if you're someone who's watching this online, then just think about what your own values are. Do you believe that the good things in the world come from people making a difference in their own lives and the lives of those they care about? Or do you think that the good things in the world come from politicians and the grand government schemes? Now, if it's the latter, I'm sorry, you're probably not an ex-supporter, but there's plenty of other parties for you. If, on the other hand, you believe the only thing that's really made the world a better place is the courage of individuals to make a difference, then there's a very good chance that you are an ex-supporter. Here's another question. Do you think it's the role of politicians to put forward and introduce policies that make the world, and particularly New Zealand, a better place? Or is it the role of politicians and political parties to merely babysit their sworn enemies' policies? Now, if you think that the role of politicians is to keep things exactly the same, then you may not be an ACT Party supporter, because we are reformers. We have ideas. We think we can make New Zealand better. We embrace the pioneering spirit of a country that wants us to be more prosperous, more free, and have greater opportunity for everybody. There are other reformers in Parliament, but they're all reforming the wrong way. So if you're a reformer, then you may be in ACT. And finally, ask yourself, who owns your life? If you think that really we're all just here to be babysat by the government, then you may not be an ACT supporter. But if you believe that we are each brought into this world unique and special, have our own experiences, our own aspirations, our own dreams and goals and knowledge of what we want, and that only through greater personal freedom can we realise those dreams and aspirations, there's a very good chance that you're an ACT supporter and that you believe in ACT for freedom.